All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you again for joining us today for the new T1 Dining and Retail Opportunities event with the San Diego International Airport and the San Diego County Regional Airport Authority. We will be providing a presentation overview of new opportunities within the new Terminal 1 and addressing questions that you may have. If you have questions during today's presentation, please submit them into the Q&A box in the bottom middle of your screen. We will address questions and answers following our presentation. And with that, we'll begin shortly. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Deanna Zackerson. I'm the Director of Revenue Generation and Partnership Development at San Diego International Airport. And I'm thrilled to welcome you today to our outreach event, our virtual outreach event, one in a series. And before we begin, I would like to introduce a few members of our staff at San Diego International Airport that have a role in providing these opportunities. I'd first like to introduce Dominique Scheck, who is the program manager for the dining and retail portion of our concessions program. I'd also like to introduce Maria Quiros, who is the small business manager, who is an expert in all things related to small business opportunities and certifications. And joining her in support today is Christine Pham, who is a small business program manager also at San Diego International Airport. We're about to just get started here with a quick video that tells the story of what it's like to operate a restaurant or shop in the airport from the perspective of those who do it every day.
We have 8 businesses. They're fantastic. We have amazing partners, and we've been here for over 9 years. The overall energy and vibe in this airport has a lot of happiness and joy, enjoying working with customers, enjoying being a part of San Diego, and sharing what makes living here special.
Usually every day is a busy day, so that's the good thing about the airport. You know, thousands of people are traveling every day. They are always early days, so typically our locations open up at 5 o'clock in the morning. Staff and management is usually getting there about 4 o'clock in the morning, get the day prepared, set up, ready to go. Business is a constant flow all the way up until closing, so it's a good thing.
The excitement of working in the airport, though, is getting the opportunity to meet people from all over the world. It really is an education process. I think it just helps one to become a better human being.
The team that oversees us in the retail and restaurant piece of the airport are incredibly supportive and are really there for us.
Yeah, there's a lot of resources out there. They're very engaging with any sort of questions and help that you have. You know, the follow-up is great. You know, contacting them, they're always there to help and support you, whether it's emails, phone calls. They definitely have a very supportive, helpful team.
It's an airport disadvantaged business enterprise, and it allows the smaller guys, the guys with not the huge balance sheets, to be competitive in the airport.
We are an ACD-BE company. The great thing about the San Diego Airport is they are very small business friendly. We've currently been here at the San Diego Airport about 9 years now. So we signed on with an original 7-year lease. Our lease has been extended over time.
Our most important element in the airport is our employees, because without good employees, you do not have a good operation. And it can be a career for you.
You need to be able to pass a 10-year background check to be able to work in an airport. In addition to that, the parking situation is that it is a separate lot and they have to be shuttled in. They have to be badged. The upside, though, is that the wages are really good in an airport typically, and so are the benefits. And so there's definitely more of a career-oriented person that would work in an airport.
All products are delivered to the distribution center. And then from the distribution center, it goes to a small warehouse that we have here in the airport. And then we also, during the day, that's how we replenish, and that's how we restock.
So anything from a wine key to a knife to a screwdriver, we're required to verify that all of those are safely kept, locked up in some cases, and verified every 4 hours that we physically touch and monitor where all of those things are.
Yeah, it's definitely an experience like you wouldn't receive somewhere else outside of an airport. There's a lot to learn and a lot to gain from it.
I think airports are turning more into malls, and that's a good thing because people are having much more of a variety to choose from now.
They're really recognizing what the customer is looking for, and I think we do that really well here. A lot of unique things that make our airport great. We want them to be comfortable. We want them to be taken care of. We want them to eat things that are local to San Diego, that really represent this city. And so I think there's something to being in the airport that you want to make time to be here.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our second virtual outreach event. We as panelists cannot see you the way that the screen is set up, so it's a little bit weird, but we'll do our best to communicate the most important information, and hopefully you will find this session very helpful. Again, my name is Dominique Scheck. I'm the program manager over our concession program. And I will go over some of the high-level information regarding our program here at San Diego International Airport. And then I will turn it over to Deanna, who will speak specifically to the opportunities in the new Terminal 1. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with our airport, San Diego, we are the third busiest airport in the state of California after LAX and San Francisco. And in 2019, prior to the pandemic, we served a record number here at our airport of 25 million total passengers. So we were very happy with that achievement. However, with the pandemic and how that's affected the travel industry in general, in today's numbers in August of 2022, we are slightly recovered, a little bit hovering around that 80% of our pre-pandemic level. So we still have room for improvement to achieve how we were doing before. However, we are optimistic, and summer has been very good for us. And we actually had a month where we've exceeded 2 million enplanements, which is the type of numbers that we were doing prior to the pandemic. So that's a really solid, good sign. With that, we know that our facilities, especially Terminal 1, is in need of major improvement. For those of you who have traveled out of Terminal 1 over the past 10 years or so, you've noticed that it's quite crowded. Southwest is our largest airline with the most amount of flights per day. And basically, if you're flying Southwest, it's very crowded. And if you go to Terminal 2 West, you're going to have a completely different experience. So our airport, we are committed to providing first-class customer service, and therefore we understand that there's a need to improve the experience in Terminal 1, and that's why we are pursuing this project. And it just goes to show that regardless, pandemic or not, our region is, always going to be vibrant and has room for growth and expansion, and we want our facilities to reflect this. So just a little bit of, academics about our airport. This is the academic slide. The Airport Authority, we were formed in 2003 as an independent organization. We separated from the Port of San Diego, so we are no longer part of the port, and we are governed by a 9-member board that is appointed from all over the county so that we represent our whole county. And our CEO is Kim Becker, and she is responsible for leading our staff to run all aspects of our airport operations. And as required by the FAA, the airport has to be a self-sustaining enterprise. So what that means is we actually don't receive any local tax dollars to fund any of our operations or construction that you see here. We do all of that based out of our own funding sources. Although we receive some federal grants, those have to be used for very specific purposes, and they're usually not responsible for all the construction that you see. So if you're traveling by our campus and you see all the crazy construction going on, please know that none of your tax dollars are funding any of these efforts, and that all the madness that you see is really just to benefit your future experience when all this is said and done. As a result of being a public agency, all of our business agreements or contracts that exceed a 5-year term have to go to the board after a competitive solicitation process, and we'll go through the details of that in a little bit. Next slide, please. So in the concessions program here at San Diego, we report to Hampton Brown, who is our vice president of a division called Revenue Generation. And actually we have a longer name than that, but he oversees a couple of different departments, of which our department, Revenue Generation, falls under his guidance. And the director of our department is Deanna Zackerson, who you will hear from shortly in a little bit more. And I myself, I report to Deanna, and I have a team of professionals who do all the day-to-day operations and management of all the contractual leases that enable the concession program to run. And in addition to that, we have a small business development team that you were introduced to earlier, and they help us organize and ensure compliance of all of our small business programs, including some FAA required ACDB programs, and making sure that all that is in compliance with, the overall concession program as well. So here in San Diego, all of the retail units and food and beverage units that you see in our terminals are managed under multiple legal entities. So we don't have one master prime concessionaire. We have a multiple prime concessionaire model. So what that means is we have about 9 different legal entities that operate numerous contracts that operate all of the units that you see inside the terminal building. A lot of these legal entities are formed of various joint venture partners, of which they usually have a minority or small business partner as part of that joint venture. Or we have small businesses that may operate like independent units as well. And with all of the development that we're having with new Terminal 1, after hearing today's information, if it seems like it's too much for you to take on at this time, please do not fear, because when Terminal 1 is done, we actually have our whole program in Terminal 2 that actually needs to be revisited and refreshed, and new contracts solicited and bid out as well. So for a long time to come at San Diego International Airport, we're going to have a lot of upcoming contracting opportunities. So just if this is a place of interest for your business to operate, please stay connected with us so that you can hear about all these opportunities. All right, so when it comes to doing business at the airport, for most types of businesses, your main target customer is going to be departing customers. And the term that we use in our industry is this word called enplanements. So those are the number of people who have actually bought a ticket to get on a flight here in San Diego to go somewhere else. So enplanements is the number that most airports are going to look at to forecast a lot of their potential sales against. It's kind of a measure of how healthy your, airport traffic, we always want to increase our airport traffic. So as you can see from the years of 2015 to 2019, we had a very healthy enplanement growth, going from 10 million to 12.6 million passengers. And in 2020, with the pandemic, that basically crushed everybody's hopes and dreams in the travel industry, and our employments decreased drastically. And since then, we've been rebounding, and we are very optimistic that we, are getting closer to our pre-pandemic levels. But as you can see, we're still a little bit under. And every year, we redo these numbers to ensure that they are, what you see for like 2023 and 2024, those are our budgeted forecasted numbers, but we revisit those at the end of every fiscal year. So those numbers may change by the time next year's fiscal year information comes out. But this is just kind of a illustrative example of where we think we're headed. But it is a conservative estimate. Next slide, please. So our airport actually services about over 70 nonstop destinations. And if you are interested in seeing, every single list of those cities, all those nonstop destinations are available on our website. We service about 11 nonstop international destinations right now. And those international flights, they go to Japan, Canada, United Kingdom, Germany, and Mexico. And the little chart that you see on the right-hand side of the slide is a breakdown of the carriers and the volume that they do here at our airport, and obviously shown Southwest being our largest carrier. Another metric that people will reference a lot when they are doing business at an airport is this term called sales per enplanement. So going back to that enplanement number. And this is another data point that helps those of us who run airport operations to know like how healthy our program is. So sales per enplanement basically means the average amount of money that each enplaned passenger is spending at your store. And this is one that's specific to food and beverage sales per enplanement. And the $7 figure that you kind of see that's at the peak is actually considered very healthy. So that's saying that of every enplaned passenger that's coming through your store in a food and beverage capacity, they're spending about $7.63. So these types of data help you to forecast what your anticipated like monthly and annual sales would be for business and forecasting purposes. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Deanna to go over the specific opportunity in Terminal 1.
All right. Hopefully you can all hear me and that I'm back with you. This is the exciting big reveal portion of the presentation where we get to talk about the new opportunities that are coming available in Terminal 1. So next slide. All right. So it'll be here before you know it. 2025 seems like a ways off, but it is right around the corner. And New Terminal 1 is really a transformative, landmark project for the San Diego region. As you know, there are 2 terminals at San Diego International Airport currently, and the terminal that is going to be replaced over the next few years is a 1967-ish era building, quite small, as Dominique mentioned. And this $3.4 billion investment is going to create a state-of-the-art terminal with lots of the modern amenities that travelers are expecting today. The square footage is around 1 million square feet. We'll have 2 major legacy carriers in this terminal, as we mentioned before, Southwest, but also Delta. And as we know, JetBlue and Frontier are going to be merging, and Frontier is currently a terminal tenant in Terminal 1. So with that, we will have roughly 24 new food and beverage locations, 10 new news, gift, convenience, and specialty retail locations. That's a mouthful, but I'll explain what all that is. Essentially, all of these locations are designed to create a balanced offering for the traveling public that on the food side will include casual dining and bars, what we call QSRs or quick service restaurants, your traditional fast food restaurants, and also gourmet coffee, which is of course extremely popular in San Diego. On the retail side, a combination of news gift stores, which is essentially a place where you would pick up a souvenir, maybe a newspaper and a magazine to read on the flight. Convenience retail, which would be a bag of chips, something to drink, something to eat on the flight. And then also some specialty retail that will be very tailored and specific to the San Diego region. All of these locations and the concepts that are broadly defined are really considered to create a balance, as I said, and really make sure that we provide an appropriate but also a very complete offering to the traveling public. The total program, when it's built out, which I'll explain will be built in phases, is about 70,000 square feet of space. And that's compared to roughly 17,000 square feet of space in the current Terminal 1. So it is quite an expansion that is intended to serve the San Diego region for decades to come. Next slide. All right, this is New Terminal 1. What's really exciting about the New Terminal 1, it is a design that is different for San Diego. Most of the terminal layouts in the current airport, as you know, are more or less sort of lollipop shaped. There's a stick with a round end at each terminal, and this is really a departure from that. It is a long and linear building. It's very efficient from the standpoint of operating airlines. I think you can see on the right hand of your slide, which is the easterly direction of the terminal, that you have aircraft that are parked on both sides of the terminal. It's very efficient. The terminal will be built in phases, as I said, and the first major phase of the project is anticipated to be done in third quarter of 2025. And that is 19 new gates that will serve Southwest Airlines. And that is being built, essentially what you see, all the construction that's going on outside, that is preparing the site for that part of the terminal build. Then there is an interim step where another 3 gates will open up in 2026. So there's a little bit of a lag time, not so much in the preparation of the building, but when those 3 gates will be taken into service. And then the last phase of the construction is slated for 2027, the remaining 8 gates of the terminal. And that portion of the terminal actually lies on the site of the existing Terminal 1. So the existing Terminal 1 needs to be demolished first, and then that portion of the terminal will be built. A lot of this is pretty complicated, but it's all part of building a new terminal, operating an airport, and building and using it at the same time. So kind of like remodeling your kitchen while you're trying to serve Thanksgiving dinner. It's just that complicated. All right, next slide, please. All right, we're going to show you a little bit at a closer level what the terminal looks like. Since it is so long and linear, it is a little bit difficult to see just the expanse of the terminal. But this is the entire terminal in place. And really what this is designed to show you is that there is a balance between the food and beverage locations, which are indicated in the orange or dark peach color, and then the retail locations that are indicated in the blue color. There is a dotted line there to the left, which really indicates the delineation between the first and latter portions, the 2025 and the 2027 construction of the terminal. And we'll look even in more detail at each section of the terminal. So next slide, please. So this is the easterly portion of the terminal. This is the first 19 gates. And this is the area for Southwest Airlines. And just want to point out a couple of real showstopper portions of this part of the terminal. First of all, you will see that at the left edge of the slide that there is a food court area with a common area seating. So there we will have some of the quick serve restaurants, 4 of them, but also together with a very expansive bar restaurant location with high ceilings, beautiful piece of artwork in an area next to an outdoor patio. And the outdoor patio is a place where people can eat, dwell, enjoy the views. And this area in total is really intended to be a place where people can dwell and enjoy themselves while they wait for their flight. One thing that's really significant about the design of the entire offering in the terminal is the openness. We've really tried to work to get away from boxes where you have your retail and your dining in these very separate areas from the rest of the terminal. And one of the ways that we've done this is by pulling the storefronts back about 10 feet so that the first 10 feet or so of every concession is really open space where people have an easy sight line down the terminal and can see what their offerings are, what their choices are as they look down the terminal. Our objective really is to minimize the need for a lot of signage because you can essentially see what is available right in front of you. Another piece that is very significant here or exciting for us really is at the very end of the concourse, there's a round bar location, 1,500 square feet. And that is in the area where Southwest Airlines will have a very open seating area. It will be non-traditional from what you usually see with an airline. You usually see ticket podiums or check-in podiums at every gate, and Southwest is doing away with that because most people are using their cell phones. So there'll be a couple of ticket podiums right as you enter that area, but otherwise it will be very open, high ceilings. So we're really looking forward to that bar location being a real visual showstopper at the very end of the concourse. And then we'll look at the next section. Next slide, please. Alrighty, this is the mid-concourse area, and this is significant because it's the area that you will enter the terminal. You can see very clearly there the security checkpoint and the lines leading up to the security checkpoint. What's significant here is not really any concession offering pre-security, because as we've learned over the years, certainly since 9/11, most people want to get through security and check out their offerings on the other side. So that's where the concentration is. And when you come out through the security checkpoint here, you'll be met immediately by a coffee location and also a retail convenience location. And since we are predominantly morning airport, morning departures, you can bet that's going to be a coffee location that's going to be real attractive to those early morning travelers. Next slide, please. And this is the western portion of the terminal. And as you can see here, this is the portion that will be built in the later phase. Again, it is a mixture of retail and food and beverage, and also some dwelling areas with an entertainment stage. And again, at the end of the concourse, a bar location where Delta Airlines will be located. And also for the first time, there will be a bridge that will connect, as you can see from that bar, that will connect Terminal 1 to Terminal 2 post-security. So that'll be a big convenience for folks that are looking to change planes and change airlines between one terminal to the next. So as you can see, there's just a mixture, pretty spaced out of different types of offerings for the traveling public. So next slide. All right, I'm going to talk a little bit more specifically about the opportunities and how they have been prepared, and give you a little bit more information about how to actually pursue these. So next slide, please. All right, first of all, what's probably the most fundamental thing to talk about if you are an operator from a street side location, whether it be dining or retail, that airport concessions is really an apples to oranges comparison. Really can't be emphasized enough how different it is to have your business in a secure location like an airport as opposed to being on the street. First of all, of course, since we are a public entity, as Dominique mentioned earlier, we select our businesses a little bit differently. We do it based on a comparison of competitive proposals. So later on this fall, we will issue a request for proposals document. And that document will spell out exactly what it is that you as a business owner would need to provide us in order to evaluate and compare your proposal to other proposals we might receive for the same locations. Some of the things that we will be looking for and evaluating and scoring are looking at the concept itself and whether it is a strong concept that people are likely to gravitate to, if the offering is appropriate and appealing to the traveling public. We also look at the financial strength of the proposer. And the reason for that is because when you're building in an airport, not only is it very expensive to build in an airport, but it also is a pretty lengthy process. So we're in 2022 right now, and we're looking at opportunities that will be open for business in 2025. So there's going to be a good portion of time when you actually will be designing and constructing your location or locations. And during that time, you're not bringing in any money. So you need to have enough working capital to be able to sustain the business. And we look at that. Obviously, we look at the revenue potential for the business. It's far from the most important criteria, but it is an indicator of the strength of the concept and how well it is meeting passenger demand. So obviously that would be important. And then, of course, your location will be in the brand new facility. And we are going to be looking at what you propose for design and construction of that facility, that it will be visually appealing to customers, that it will be aesthetically appropriate for the airport location, and even built in such a way that it'll be durable enough to stand, frankly, the punishment that these locations get from people, lots of people coming through with suitcases in a hurry, and just, it's pretty heavy volumes in these locations. So one of the other things that's different from the street is that most units or locations in an airport are offered in packages. In other words, they're clustered. So it's not a single location in most cases, it's multiple locations. And there's a number of reasons for doing that that I will touch more on, but primarily it is, again, the concept of balance. Some locations are inevitably going to have a lot of foot traffic. Others will have less foot traffic. The objective, of course, for the airport is to have all good locations for our business partners, but inevitably some are going to generate more money than others. And so we balance those locations so that overall there is a likelihood of success and profitability at the same time as we're providing service throughout the terminal. And we'll talk more specifically about what packages look like. Leases in airports, I want to say, are typically 10 years, but that's really used to be typically 10 years. And that is a byproduct of the pandemic. The pandemic has increased costs for construction, and lease term is really tied to investment and how much time it takes for a concessionaire to amortize their investment. So these days, most airports are looking at leases that are in excess of 10 years, depending upon what that investment looks like. And at the end of that 10 years, there's a lot of things that can happen, but typically that concession will have done its time, and it will be packaged again with other locations and will be competitively bid out again to the marketplace. Rent in an airport is really one of the most significant differences to the street. You do not pay a per square foot charge to rent. There's no triple net like you would see in the street. It is a percentage of sales. And the reason for that is that, first of all, spaces are typically small in an airport. You'll find out that a space that you might have 2,000 square feet on the street to operate, you might have 700 to 1,000 square feet to operate the same concept. So the space is small, but the volumes are large. You have a lot of volume just due to the fact that there are so many people coming through the airport. So for that reason, it makes more sense for the airport to charge as a percentage of sales, and that is an industry-wide standard. There are additional costs in addition to that, oftentimes also as a percentage of sales, and those things might actually sound somewhat familiar, at least common area maintenance, garbage, utilities, that kind of thing. But there's a couple of different things that we have as part of a facility like an airport. We have centralized distribution, and that means that your product deliveries go to a central location on the north side of the airfield. They are inspected in that facility for security reasons. Everything going into the airport product has to be inspected for security. And then it is transported from that distribution center by a vendor to the location at the airport across the airfield. So, and that is an additional charge for that. And that is an efficiency and a security measure that really works well for San Diego. And then there are just some things as part of operating in an airport that are more efficient, such as trying to control those pesky pests that tend to wander from place to place. And even garbage removal and things like that are all costs that the authority essentially handles for you as a business owner, but you do pay for that. And then finally, the most important consideration probably in an airport is the higher than typical labor costs. As you heard in the video to begin this session, it is inconvenient for people to work in an airport. You really have to be committed to it because you are taking a shuttle in from a remote parking lot. You are coming into work at 4:30 in the morning. You are getting a security clearance. Any number of those things make an airport job a place that you really commit to work. And so for that, operators in airports, whether it be restaurants or retail shops, will typically pay higher labor costs. However, the plus side of that is, of course, that you get some folks that actually do stay in your employment for quite a long time, more so than you would see in a street location. All right, on to the next slide. All right, so just going to touch on the different opportunities for business to participate in the program, because not one size fits all. There's different levels of involvement, there's different levels of investment, there's different levels of risk. And so we really want to, clearly characterize the different ways that you can be a part of this and really look at the model that suits you best. So a direct lessee with the airport authority is just what it sounds. You have a lease agreement directly with the airport authority. And you will see that we have a couple of opportunities in Terminal 1 to lease a single unit. And those units will be tailored for small businesses that want to come in and just operate one unit. We also will have joint venture partners with more experienced concessionaires, which I'll talk more in depth about. There may be some subtenant lease opportunities that really is up to the larger operators that come in, whether they are interested in subleasing units. And then there's the brand license agreement. That is really sort of the, at least from a financial perspective, the least risky mode of participating in the program. I'll just talk a little bit about each one of those. So next slide. So like I said, being a direct lessee, that is the going all the way. It is the greatest risk and potentially the greatest reward. So as a direct lessee, you're going to be solely responsible for making the investment in the construction and in the business, and you're solely responsible for operating the business. You are actually responsible for submitting that proposal, that request for proposals response to the airport authority to compete against others that are proposing in the same way. You do need to develop a realistic pro forma of expected sales and costs to operate. And we're looking forward to, as we get closer to the issuance of the RFP, providing some more specific information to those folks who are interested in this model on how to really look at what typical costs would likely be in an airport to be able to develop that. You really do need to be able to operate in challenging environments, high volume environments, an environment where you have a bulk of your customers coming in the early part of the day. As a West Coast airport, most of our passengers have passed through the airport by 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon. big rush from about 5 o'clock in the morning, at least coming through the checkpoints, until after lunch. So, that's challenging. The deliveries are challenging. Taking care of your knives and sharp objects is challenging. So hopefully our video gave you a little bit of sense about that. But if you are good at it and you enjoy it, and there are some people who do think it's a really exciting place to be. As I mentioned about lease terms getting longer, that is due to the investment requirement that is growing. And for those who are interested in operating their own unit and investing in their own unit, the range today is between $1,500 and $2,000 a square foot. $2,000 a square foot would be more for a food and beverage location that has a lot of infrastructure like grease hoods and things like that. Maybe a retail or convenience shop closer to the $1,500 a square foot, but it is significant. It is significant, especially compared to the street side. So again, the real key to being a direct lessee, if that is your cup of tea and you want to be the master of your own fate and reap the potential rewards, then it could be really something for you. So next slide. But if that sounds kind of daunting, there is the option, if you are a small minority-owned business, an ACDBE preferably, to partner with a more experienced concessionaire, where they really become your mentor to help you learn about the airport business. The concessionaire, the prime concessionaire, they prepare that proposal to the airport. You participate in that, but they really have the experience to be able to put something together like that. These partnerships, they typically have multiple partners with an investment between 5 and 15% of the initial investment costs. And then your involvement in that business, which is required, is commensurate with that investment. So it's not something that you just invest your money in and walk away from. It really is a business that you participate in. With this kind of a joint venture, of course, there's more parties involved. And so there's more paperwork. There's going to be attorneys and agreements and just different requirements as being part of a joint venture. And, as with all of these opportunities that I'm talking about now, this one and the next few, it's really important to choose a partner that you can trust, that you feel they're being transparent with you, they're really showing you the risks and the benefits of the deal and really scrutinize it. The neat thing about being a joint venture partner, though, that I have seen is that you really can become part of a nationwide community of airport joint venture partners. It is truly a community, and it's a great thing to see folks that operate in different airports get together, compare notes, and experience all of it together. So next slide. So subtenant leases are actually more similar to being a direct lessee. The big difference, of course, is that the airport authority will not be your landlord. Instead, it will be another prime concessionaire as your contractual landlord. But you are responsible for the investment in the unit, operating the unit. It's typically a preference by the primes to have a small minority-owned business as their subtenant, but not always. And again, you would have the opportunity to learn from a more experienced concessionaire, sort of in a mentoring capacity. The prime concessionaire would submit the proposal to the airport. You don't need to do that. These opportunities used to be more common. They're less common today. Excuse me. And they're really at the discretion of the prime concessionaire. And again, choose a partner that you can trust. Next slide. And finally, the brand licensing agreement. This is actually very common in San Diego. You see them throughout the airport. And it is an execution of a local brand concept, but by one of these large experienced concessionaires. So examples of those in an airport can be anything from, frankly, a Starbucks to, which is not local, but ubiquitous for airports and any community, really. But local brands can be something like Panikin, Phil's Barbecue, Stone Brewing, a number of them in our airport already. And if you have one of those concepts that is locally valued and locally recognized, this might be an option for you if you are not necessarily interested in learning how to operate in an airport. So the benefit that you get from this, of course, is the exposure of your brand to a large audience. Now, the prime concessionaire, they have the responsibility for executing that concept. And so you want to make sure that you trust that operator to faithfully execute that brand, because if it's not, it actually could do damage to your brand. So there's a potential for it to be a great thing for exposure, because the number of people passing that concept and potentially patronizing it are volumes you just won't see on the street. So the risk here, of course, is pretty limited because they are going to pay you to operate under your brand name. But the risks, they are there. Your brand name is worth something that's worth what they're willing to pay for. But again, really important to choose a partner that you can trust and that you really scrutinize the arrangement. All right, next slide. All right, so what we're going to do now is talk about the RFP packages. And I know I mentioned we have 2 direct lease locations in Terminal 1. So we developed these packages in mind with balancing the investment and the sales potential. So in other words, even though the investment is significant, the sales potential should be equally, the potential for it anyway, equal in size. As I mentioned before, the unit locations have been designed with sightline in mind so that you've got the maximum amount of exposure for your location. We, again, package the units between the moderately trafficked areas and the high traffic areas. And one of the things that is part of being in an airport is utilities. Kind of like some of these other things that I've mentioned that are really sort of part of being in the airport that are taken care of for you. Utilities is one of them. The utilities are brought to the lease line. You have responsibility for hooking up to those utility connections, however. And then the airport also provides storage on site for products so that when you need to refresh between deliveries from the distribution center. So there's going to be 5 new RFP packages and 2 direct lease locations. And I'm going to go through each of those with you just briefly. Next slide. Okay, food package number 1. There's going to be a lot of similarities between food package 1, 2, and 3 because each one of them is 7 locations. They're balanced between east and west. This particular package is about 15,000 square feet. It is food, so it is a mixture of casual dining, coffee, and fast food. And if the package was built out entirely day 1, which we don't realistically anticipate that it will be because of the phasing of construction, the first year sales would be around $21 million. Food package number 2, next slide, is again 7 locations distributed between the east and west areas. About 15,000 square feet, again, a mix of casual dining, coffee, and fast food. It also includes the prime bar location in the area with Southwest Airlines at the very end. Sales potential here is about 23.8 million if it was all built out and open at one time. So it will be phased. And package number 3, next slide. Again, 7 locations, about 13,000 square feet, a mixture of offerings. Also includes a prime bar location in the Delta area and sales in the same sales range if it was all built out day 1. So next slide, we're going to talk about the direct lease opportunities. There's 2 of them, and that's even though there's 1, we call them package 4 and 5. So the first one is a small business location in the easterly portion of the terminal near the food court. So you can see this is a gourmet coffee location. It's small, and that's intentional because even at 1,000 square feet, that is a significant investment for a small business. But it is in a prime location where you can see the food court offering in this part of the concourse is right across the way. And the next slide will show a rendering of where the location is. One of them sort of depicts the food court right across the way. So it is a great location. It will be gourmet coffee, a preference for a local brand. And conservatively, we think it'll do $1.3 million a year in its first full year of operation. Great location and a great opportunity for a small or local business. Next slide, we'll talk about quick serve restaurant, which is fast food. It's a direct lease. And this one too is in the easterly portion of the terminal in the southwest area. It is in the food court. And it will have an adjacent common area seating. You can see that it's less than 1,200 square feet. Again, this is kind of showing that a quick serve concept operates in a pretty small footprint. It could be a local concept, but it could also be a strong national concept. There needs to be room for both in this airport, because some people have a preference for some tried and true national concept that they know exactly what they're getting. Others, maybe have a favorite local concept that they're really pleased to see in the airport. One of the things you'll see here about the design, I think that is worth noting, is that these quick serve concepts, the shapes might look a little strange, but actually it's intentional because it creates a sight line and a visual interest to each one of these concepts, even though they are in side-by-side locations. I think we all know that it's not all that exciting to see a food court with just 4 straight on quick serve concepts, and this creates a little bit more interest. Alrighty, and the estimated first year sales again over 1 million. Okay, next slide. Okay, we're going to go to retail now. We didn't have a rendering yet quite of the quick serve concept, so we'll go to retail package number 1, and there are 2 retail packages. These are really typically joint venture type opportunities. The reason here is that there is a significant amount of square footage. There's 5 locations, and just news, gift, and convenience especially lends itself to good joint venture opportunities in airports. Estimated first year sales around 20 million. And next slide. And again, 5 locations in east-west areas of the concourse, the terminal, approximately 12,000 square feet. Both of these packages have a mix of news and gifts, so souvenirs and magazines, convenience items, peanuts, candy bars, even some health foods, perhaps, sandwiches, and then some specialty retail as well. And again, estimated first year sales in the $20 million range. All righty, next slide. And so schedule, this is the, you see an asterisk down at the bottom. Dates are subject to change. If any of you have been involved in construction in the past, you know that there is some unpredictability and volatility in construction of any project. And of course, we are dependent upon the terminal itself to be built and those spaces provided to our new concessionaires to build out their locations. Right now, we are in the outreach phase of this project. We will be continuing to do outreach with some additional virtual sessions, and we'll look and see if there's interest as well, and maybe an additional in-person session in San Diego. We still have time for that. We're looking to release the RFP in October, and then you do get a fair amount of time to put together the proposal. Certainly, we wouldn't be expecting to receive submittals until after the first of the year. And then we go into a phase of evaluating the proposals, selecting the best packages and proposers for the terminal, negotiating those leases. As Dominique mentioned early on, we take all of these business proposals to our board for approval, and then finally executing a lease and the conceptual approval of your designs. Then is just sort of the long slog of getting your design through reviews and getting your construction. We've tried to leave generous amounts of time in the schedule to get that done, so that when the terminal opens in 2025, everyone is ready to go. So that's the bulk of our presentation for this evening. Happy to answer questions. I know that we have had prime concessionaires participating both in our virtual sessions and in our live in-person sessions. And we are able to provide information to folks who are looking for contact information for those folks who are very anxious to speak to you if you have a local concept here in San Diego, whether it be as a brand partner or as perhaps a small business joint venture partner. So we're happy to answer questions at this point.
Thank you so much, Deanna. We have several questions in the Q&A box. And again, if you have additional questions, please feel free to submit those. We're going to go ahead and get started answering several questions that have come in and go from there. A first couple of questions that have been answered but would like to take directly. Is it possible for folks to view a copy of this presentation after the meeting? Will they be able to find it online on the airport's website and on the new Terminal 1 website?
Well, that's an easy question to answer. Yes, we have been posting this presentation on our new T1 Business Opportunities website. We have updated it over the course of the summer. So as we have made updates to it, we have refreshed that version of the presentation. So just make sure that you check to make sure you have the most recent version.
Great, thank you. Another couple of questions that have come in specifically on, you mentioned cost of doing business is a little different in an airport than elsewhere on the street. What is the average typical pay for employees in an airport position? Is it the video mentioned higher than average? Do you have a range on that, Deanna?
Well, that is a good question. Obviously that is going to vary by employer. We have many employees that work in the airport that are part of a collective bargaining unit. And then we have some that are not, and they're directly employed and their wages are negotiated directly with their employer. But I think in California, it's no mystery that anything less than $15 an hour is pretty much not going to attract the kind of workforce that you need. And it really ranges. There could be folks that are making close to $20 an hour. There are folks that are tipped employees, so servers and bartenders, that of course are making quite a bit more just by virtue of the fact that they're making tips. One thing that I think is worth mentioning is that it has been, like for every business on the street in the last year plus, difficult to attract employees. And one of the measures that was put in place at the airport is currently a 2% surcharge that our current concessionaires have had the option of adding to their ticket. And that money has gone directly toward the employees, and there was directly to the employees, typically the workers that are not being tipped, to help improve employee retention and hiring. And from everything we understand, that has worked. We have a much better situation today. The surcharge is a temporary, at least until the end of the year. And then it will be up to the airport board to decide whether that is going to sunset or not. But additionally, I should say that the employees that are part of collective bargaining agreements, they also have pretty significant benefits and even retirement. So it really depends on if you are the kind of employer that is likely to be under a collective bargaining agreement, which would be some of the larger concessionaires, or if you are not, and that is typically our smaller businesses. So not a black and white answer, but hopefully at least provided a little bit of nuance to that.
Thank you, Deanna. We've had a couple of questions today about kind of the typical build out costs for these spaces. And so I'm going to combine a couple of questions, but what is the typical cost for build out? And does the airport offer any tenant improvement support?
That is actually a great question. First time I've heard that question, and that is about tenant improvements specifically. And that is one of the other unique differences with an airport, is that because it is a public agency and not a private landlord, you're not working through a broker, we are not able to provide tenant improvements. So you will get a space that is tenancy ready. In this case, essentially a white box space with utilities that you can build out, but the investment is something that the individual business carries on its bottom line. Now, why it's expensive, we're not unique. San Diego is certainly not unique. If you look up and down the West Coast, build out costs have all come in in those ranges even recently. So and those build out costs are typically the result of higher labor costs and materials costs that you find in California. So hopefully that addresses that question.
Absolutely. Kind of a follow-up question to those items. What is the typical, and or is there a range of the percentage per profit that the airport takes for the profit share with the business model? So what is that percent of sales? Is there an average?
Okay, that's a really good question. So what I can say is that for the existing concessions that we have in place today, that of course, many of them were built, close to 10 years ago. Tenants were paying, depending upon if it's retail or if it's food and beverage, for a percentage around the area of 15%. Now, that's not a hard and fast number, because what happens is that it's just one of the considerations that you as a business owner need to make, looking at the other variables. So when I say 15%, well, that was assuming perhaps a 10-year lease. It's assuming a certain pricing level, which, as I'll address maybe a question that might come up, is our pricing policy. Today, the pricing policy in San Diego is a street price plus 15%. So you are charging a higher sale in the airport than you are on the street. So there's a bunch of variables. If leases get longer, then that's something that you would factor in. Certainly construction costs, if they increase, you factor in. So it's really all part of the pro forma and what you think is a fair percentage that you can pay to the airport authority and run a business profitably.
Great. A couple more questions for you, Deanna. We have several in the queue, so I'm going to keep us moving along. Can an individual or a joint venture bid and or win more than one package?
That's a really good question. Currently, what we believe is that we will accept proposals from as many proposals as someone wants to submit. So there's not a limitation on the proposals. We currently don't have a specific limitation on the number of packages that one concessionaire could win. However, we do believe that it will be at the discretion of the airport authority to decide whether to award more than one package to a particular entity. So propose if you have something that you want us to look at. We won't necessarily place a constraint in looking at those proposals, but we'll really evaluate them on the merits of those proposals.
Great. Another question for you. You mentioned that there are several things that are taken care of by the airport for an operator if they operate inside the airport, like trash, all of the common delivery items. What is the typical cost for those, or are they built into the percentage of sales, or do they come as a separate cost to business or joint venture?
Yes, it's a bit of a nuanced answer because some are tied to gross sales. So for example, the centralized distribution is currently at 1.5% of your gross sales. That's the current rate. And other items, however, you pay based on your use. So for example, if you are a concept that has a grease hood, you're venting grease out of your location, you will pay a fee based on the cost to clean that grease hood, which of course, if you're a retail shop, you're not going to be paying that at all. That's one example, sort of infrastructure cleaning and that kind of thing. So some of it is based on your actual usage. Most of it is based on your actual usage, so that if you're not using it at all, you're not paying. But definitely there are some things that are just a fixed fee based on your sales volumes.
Okay, thank you. Another question for you. This schedule that you highlighted is obviously a subject to change schedule. Is there an exact date yet for the RFP to be released, or is it targeted for a fall release and people will find out more information as the date gets closer?
Yeah, currently we have a tentative date of the 3rd of October, which is obviously the first week of October. It's tentative, however, and of course we are dependent upon a multitude of other inputs to this process in order to get the information out for everybody to be able to work with. So it's going to be incumbent upon us to be providing continual updates on when the release is likely to happen. So if it slips from the first week of October, we will let people know, and we will continue to let people know what our estimated release date will be.
Great, thank you. A few more questions as we're talking about the RFP. Is there for folks who may not be familiar with an RFP process, is there maybe one criteria that stands out over others for a potential restaurant to be accepted? Or is that part of the entire process of the RFP to be evaluated?
Well, the scoring criteria have yet to be exactly determined. It is a scoring process, of course, and some areas of an RFP proposal, and I touched on them earlier, such as concept and financial strength and revenue projections and design, all of those things will be assigned a value. I would say that there's not one criteria that is going to have a significant number of points more than another criteria. There might be, slight differences, but usually the prime concern is whether, for example, revenue potential is going to have, 10 more points than some other consideration, and that's really not going to be the case. It's a pretty balanced evaluation.
Great, thank you. A couple more questions for you today, Deanna. Are operators restricted to operating during the airport hours, or can they stay open later? What are the hours of operation dictated for potential concessionaires?
Yeah, so as Dominique touched on in the very beginning, your hours of operation are driven by departing passengers, by in-plane passengers. Not so much arriving passengers, because those folks are, they're headed to baggage claim as quickly as they can get there. But, we know based on airline schedules, even though obviously there are, instances when they deviate from those, but generally we do know airline schedules, and we know, the type of aircraft that are being flown. We know the approximate number of passengers. So, one of the things that is different, and I think a good thing for operators in an airport, is that you do have more information to work off of. You do know that, Thursday is likely to be busier than Sunday, or just based on the information that we have about the flights that are departing. So, but those hours, that said, they are outside of the typical hours that you would operate on the street. So if you run a restaurant on the street from, 10 a.m. to 9 p.m., that's you're open and you're hoping people will come and patronize you during those hours. It doesn't work that way in an airport. It's the patrons will be there and you will need to be open. And so as we are a West Coast airport, typically it's going to be in the morning. Everybody's going to need to be open early in the morning. And really how late you need to be open depends on departing traffic. But the hours of operations are typically longer than what you would see on the street, for
Great.
sure.
Okay, that's really helpful. You mentioned that there are many prime concessionaires who are interested in meeting local businesses here in San Diego. How can local businesses who are maybe a local restaurant or brand that are interested in partnering, how can they get more information or connect with prime concessionaires?
Yeah, that is a good question. We have in our in-person events distributed information of the concessionaires that are either in San Diego already or have indicated an interest in pursuing opportunities in San Diego. That is a list that we are going to make available on our new T1 website. We're just refining that list. It's one of those things where new people are kind of popping up all the time that are interested in opportunities. And we'll provide that information so that you can reach out either by email or by phone to named individuals at these companies who are accustomed to receiving calls from folks that are interested in local communities.
Wonderful. Shifting gears a little bit to the issues of ABC and the issuance of alcohol licenses for tenants. Are there any issues or guidance to be aware of for those groups potentially interested in the bar restaurant concept? Will ABC issue type 47 and or type 48? Are there additional costs to be aware of?
Okay, well, I'll touch on this and then I'm going to tee up Dominique because Dominique actually has been working with concessionaires even recently coming into the airport that are looking for liquor licenses. We at the airport typically provide a tenant with a letter certifying that they are coming into the airport environment, and alcohol sales in the airport are part of the authorities, its own ordinances. But I'm going to pass to Dominique and ask if you're able to comment a little bit more in detail about that.
Yes, so as Deanna mentioned, at the point where a tenant would need to obtain a liquor license, the authority writes a letter on behalf of the new tenant to the ABC office, basically authorizing the fact that this tenant will be on site and is in need of that license. However, we do not know the additional cost amount for that. I'm not sure if it's assessed like per situation. That's something that we could probably do some more research on and provide a written response to.
I think that sounds great. Thank you, Dominique. Thank you, Deanna. We do have a few more questions to get through. I do know we are running shorter on time, but I want to get through a couple more. With the deadlines for the RFP, can folks actually submit their completed responses early, or do they need to wait until the final deadline to submit?
This will be a piece of advice that I would give, and that is that once that RFP document is issued, take all of the time that you have, because your proposal can only get better the more attention you put to it. So, it's not going to be evaluated any sooner if you turn it in early. That's probably the most important thing. Once the proposal deadline has passed, all of the proposals are in, that is when they first get any attention by an evaluation panel. So take the time you need and just submit before the deadline.
Great. Another question on maybe sort of the build out and construction of these spaces once leased. Are tenants required to comply with prevailing wage law, union labor while under construction, or does that not apply to an airport tenant?
Well, I think in short, when the airport itself is conducting construction, there are different requirements than when a private business conducts construction. And so the airport authority does not tend to be involved in that. That's definitely something that one would look into, whether you're planning to hire construction workers, for example, that are under a collective bargaining agreement or not. That construction process is really all up to the tenant, and the airport authority really isn't involved in that. So if the airport authority is building something itself, it complies with prevailing wage and those kinds of things. But since we are not directly responsible for that, that's not our consideration.
Great, thank you. Moving on to some questions about F&B. Who would someone contact for getting guidelines of what kind of F&B outlets would food and beverage be acceptable in a particular location and for selection of ideas?
So we will be providing in the RFP document, we will be providing information about what concepts would be acceptable. So really, attending these events, of course, helps provide information about what kind of the balance that we're looking for. And before we actually issue the RFP, we will have some information sessions that are essentially pre-proposal conferences that will provide more information, excuse me, about what is actually in the document itself and more detail there.
Great, thank you. A few more things. There's a couple of questions here. I'll read some of these questions that have just come in. Curious if you can share the specific spaces which make up each of the larger food and beverage packages. And I believe, Deanna, that information is actually available on the map that you shared, the different spaces. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. And we also have we didn't show it in this version, but we do have a map that shows the specific package locations, like where these units are located. And that we can provide on our website as well.
Yes, we can do that. So we'll be able to provide a terminal map that has the makeup of the larger food and beverage packages. Additionally, you highlighted that there is an interest in that in the kind of single spot coffee, targeted coffee site. Do you have any other ideas for targeted types of cuisine for the other food and beverage packages, or are they open to just about any cuisine folks could think about, or are there very specific targets in this pursuit?
Well, some of these locations will more logically lend themselves to a more targeted type of concept. So, for example, the locations that I spoke about that are just on the other side of the security checkpoint, a coffee location there is going to make perfect sense because 5:30 in the morning, that's what people are going to be looking for. Other locations, there's going to be a lot more flexibility as far as what type of concept could go in there. And even when it comes to the request for proposals phase, we are looking at the ability for proposers to propose more than one concept for a space. So you might not necessarily be putting all of your eggs in one basket for a specific location, so that when we look at the proposals on the whole, we can have some flexibility in what concepts go together with other concepts in their adjacencies.
Great. That brings up another important point. We've talked a lot about local restaurants and the idea of local concepts in the new terminal. Is the airport only looking for local restaurants, or is it restaurants with a local kind of identification, California general? What does that mean for interested potential concessionaires?
Right. So if you look at the existing concessions in Terminal 2, there are the more recent concessions, even Terminal 1, you'll see that there is a mixture of national concepts and local concepts. So we need to have both, because having just one or of the other would not be meeting the needs of the traveling public. However, we are pretty keen on that they need to be a recognizable brand. We're not interested in bringing in proprietary concepts. That would be sort of like a concept that exists nowhere else but in that one location. So people are not going to know what it is. That we have gravitated away from in airport environments. We want to be able to provide people with brand names, whether they be local or national, that people recognize.
Great, thank you. Last question, Deanna, that's in the queue. Is the plus 15% street price policy a strict one, or is that flexible?
Well, it's strict in the sense that what it means is you are selling a product in the airport. We look for a comparable product on the street. So, and not in a, for example, you wouldn't compare a container of yogurt from an airport, a convenience store to one that's sold in the supermarket. You would look and compare it to another convenience retail type location on the street, and then you would be allowed to add 15% to that price. So it's strict in the sense that, you know, there is a methodology behind it. You know, you actually have a comparable on the street, and then you add that 15%. That's a pretty generous pricing policy at airports. You know, airport pricing has been more flexible in recent years because costs have gone up. But street plus 15 is a pretty solid place to be right now for an airport.
I'm not sure if the person who asked the question was inquiring whether or not they're required to implement the 15%. So just to clarify, that 15% is a maximum that any concessionaire would be able to apply on their prices. They cannot go above 15%. However, they are not required to have any markup whatsoever if their business model, you know, lends itself to not have, there's no requirement to do street pricing plus 15. It is just an option that should a concessionaire, you know, adjust prices, they cannot go above 15%. And our team has a whole methodology of how they would assess the prices that are being used per concessionaire. And if it's not in compliance, we will let you know, and we won't allow concessionaires to charge those prices if we cannot find good comps for it.
I believe that Jill is muted.
I am, you are right. I was typing one more thing for you. That concludes our questions that were in the Q&A box today. I know several of you have very specific questions the team was able to address during the Q&A. But again, we will be able to address additional questions on the through retail inquiries at excuse me. So now I turn to lose my voice at SAN.org. This information is also on the website at SAN.org and newt1.com. If you have additional questions, please feel free to reach out to Deanna and her team. They'll be happy to follow up and address specific questions. And with that, please stay in the loop. We will continue to have events that are both virtual and potential in-person opportunities for you to learn more, connect with prime concessionaires, and potentially consider becoming a partner with the airport. Deanna, with that, I'll leave you to conclude.
All right. I just want to thank everybody for participating today. And I want to say that this is probably the best batch of questions that we have gotten so far. And, you know, this is an evolving process, and we are committed to keeping folks updated. And to the degree that our answers continue to need clarification, we're committed to doing that. So thank you very much again, and we look forward to speaking with you more. Thanks very much.